Good morning. Good morning. Everyone, good morning. Wonderful, thank you. So prosody has the power to move people, and that's why I study it. This talk will be at a very beginner level. I'll be talking about some things that you may know, some things that you may not know, and I'll be coming up with these little comments in yellow. There's 19 of these little comments. Together, these I think will characterize the state of the art in terms of challenges, innovations, trends, and issues. Rather than just giving you the punchlines, the takeaway lines, I'll introduce these in the context of explaining 4 prosodic constructions of English, and I'll talk about numerous applications. Prosody is not just for speech synthesis, it's for all sorts of things. The references, you can download those, so don't bother writing them down. All right, so thank you all for coming this morning. If I want to make that more sincere, I might say, thank you all for coming this morning. What's the difference? What is that added sincerity? Well, in part it's the prosody. You probably hear a pitch peak, maybe a couple of them. That's the problem with prosody. So we always hear the pitch. The intonation is the most salient, and classically, intonation is the most studied. But there's a lot more to prosody than that. In particular, if I really want to sound sincere, thank you all for coming this morning. I need to do a couple things. I need to raise the pitch. That happens first, typically one word. Then I'll need to lengthen the subsequent syllables, and those also might be a little bit louder than they otherwise would be. Imagine that on the statement, good job. So if your boss comes to you and says, good job, you might not feel very nice about that, but if he says, good job, right, it makes a big difference. So prosody is important in being sincere, and it's in fact, more relevantly, a temporal construction. So prosody is not just about intonation, not just about the pitch. It can be multi-stream temporal configurations. Multi-stream, so we have the pitch, the lengthening, and the loudness. They all contribute, and they just don't contribute because they're addedly random and they correlate in some vague way. They're actually the specific temporal configuration. All right, I should say that this is new, right? So up to 5 years ago, people didn't really think in these terms, and thanks largely to the work of Ogden and Niebuhr, we now realize that these things are important. Only a few constructions have been modeled in detail, so this is sort of where the state of the art is, and I think where we're going. Okay, so to convince you that this is really meaningful, let me give you a whole bunch of examples.
My last job with tutoring, I loved teaching. I love helping kids. Like, that part has never left me.
Okay, she's really positive about her career, right? I loved teaching. I loved helping kids. You hear the configuration. Here's a male voice.
Speaking of which, how do you feel about Monday's exam? I feel good.
I feel good.
But I also really love the Boondock Saints.
Okay, it's a movie she likes. And here's an actual live conversation. 2 people are moving through a video game together. One's sort of like struggling. He finally gets it right, and here's what he gets.
So let's go there. Yeah, stay on it. There you go.
There you go. All right, all different kinds of positive feelings, all conveyed by prosody. All right, so let's try it. So see if it works. I'd like you all to grab a partner, if you don't mind, and run a little skit, A and B. What's this talk about? It's about speech prosody, as if you don't care, and it's about speech prosody. Try it and see if it really feels more positive, the way I say it. Okay, did it work? Did it sound more positive? Are you getting the prosody? Okay, all right. All right, I'll have a couple more exercises as we go along. All right, so as I said, this is sort of a new perspective. The old perspective, old until about 5 years ago, was to look at these things in terms of correlations. So the way research used to be done was you look for some corpus, you label all the positive places, you then label using Toby or whatever you like, you automatically compute some prosodic features, and you correlate and you discover things like longer vowel duration can correlate with positive assessment, which is fine. These papers are fun to read, except when you look at them all together, you discover that some papers say things that contradict other papers. Is it higher mean intensity or lower mean intensity? Modal voice or is it breathy voice? The problem, I think, is when you have complicated prosodic constructions, depending on the details of how you measure the things, right? If you're measuring this aspect of this part or this aspect of this part, how you normalize them, you can come up with contradictory results. So I think it's time to stop writing those papers that just report correlations. It's even time to stop reading them. We need to think in terms of configurations. Personal opinion there. What this implies for people doing practical applications is early fusion. So feature sets like OpenSmile, for example, by default, they'll give you a set of pitch features that are computed independently from the intonation features, independently from the timing features. All the configurational information is lost. That can be a mistake sometimes. All right, stepping back for a minute. So there's basically three functions of prosody, I think. We could talk about the paralinguistic, the phonological, and the pragmatic. So at interspeech, I think the paralinguistic is that has received the most attention. Can't do that, huh? I think the paralinguistic has received the most attention. In fact, there's a session going on upstairs on paralinguistics right now. It's amazing, right? So our prosody conveys, often without our intent, things like anger, frustration, uncertainty, tiredness, drunkenness, respiratory infections, Parkinson's, depression, autism, ALS, personality, native language. I think overall this is a mature technology. So you have lots of rich feature sets, you can use powerful classifiers, and mature technology in the sense that for many tasks, these systems can actually do detection better than humans can. Not to say that there's not lots of interesting problems still to solve, but it's getting there. Applications are for diagnosis, synthesizing sort of emotional states, and for speaker identification. So the prosodic properties of individuals, even at the syllable level, are highly informative about your specific identity. Okay, moving on to the phonological. So in the linguistics world, this is what everybody likes to study. And by phonological prosody, I mean prosody is used to mark the identity of a discrete linguistic elements. Tones being the classic example. Stressed syllables, boundaries, some syntactic structures. So in these cases, the prosody is tightly linked to a single unit. It's bound to that unit. And we can study those pretty well using supervised methods. The linguists like to build models in terms of categorical descriptions and symbolic models and symbol structures and symbol trees and symbol manipulations. That's fine. Here at Interspeech, we know, of course, that there's a lot more to these things, like even a simple tone. You think of it classically as just an F0 contour, but in fact, it involves duration, voicing, spectral information. Beyond mere sequences of H and L, there's things like tone sandhi, and of course, you never actually see tones, right? You never look at an F0, so here's a real live F0 contour. You can't see the H's and the L's unless you make all sorts of assumptions. So there's a huge gap between the phonological models and the physical reality, but fortunately, that's being solved, or has been solved, or is almost solved. Again, that's mature technology. Applications for this aspect of prosody is speech recognition for tonal languages, training people to speak second languages, and synthesis regarding intelligibility and naturalness. So let's talk about synthesis just for a minute. Professor Tokuda already explained this on the very first keynote, but we've had a progression from rule-based models, based on the symbols and the things that linguists have discovered, to HMM models, where we sort of identify the things on which to condition the prosodic manipulations, to sequence models. Here's a picture of a sequence-to-sequence model. So we have the character phone sequence down at the bottom, a sequence of letters just coming in, and on the top we have the acoustic sequence. So this is a sequence, every 10 milliseconds, every frame, describing the MFCCs, the spectral information, the intensity, the F0. And the amazing thing is you can feed that in at the bottom and get the instructions to your vocoder at the top, and that this can be trained. If you have enough label data, these models can be trained. The magic, of course, is in the recurrent layer. The recurrent layer is able to capture the context dependencies that enable the one syllable to affect 2 or 3 syllables in the future. Maybe not a couple seconds, maybe not quite that far. So what's not clever about this, there's no need anymore to explicitly model intonation, duration, intensity, alignment. So a lot of the things we've enjoyed working on are maybe no longer relevant at all, possibly, perhaps. So these people, so this is the Google Tachytron crew, they have a nice definition of prosody, and this is something that makes me think. Their definition that prosody is the variation of the speech signal that's not explained by phonemes or speaker identity or channel effects. It's everything else, it's the residual. I think we need to think about that. I'll give you a more classic definition in a minute. Okay, so synthesis. So synthesis today is pretty darn good. Here's an example, a silly sentence.
The Blue Lagoon is a 1980 American romance adventure film.
Right, pretty darn good, right? So as Professor Tokuda said on the first day, speech synthesis has sort of conquered the problems of intelligibility, naturalness, maybe even expressiveness, but in terms of communicative impact, well, that's a different question. All right, and of course, the big question that these models raise, as always, is how do you suck out the knowledge that's hidden in those weights and use it for other purposes? How do you use it to explain to a learner, these are the facts about the language you're trying to learn? How do you use it to transfer? If you don't have 100 hours of labeled data for another domain, how do you suck out the relevant prosodic information? How do you control it? So the people who use deep learning models for computer vision have stood up and addressed these challenges. For prosody, we've just discovered the power of these models, and so we're not yet, I think, I'm not aware of any research that has actually challenged this problem, trying to get the information out of these models. Hopefully we'll see a lot of that soon. Okay, so, but my focus in this talk is on the pragmatic aspects of prosody, and I think over the past decades, people tended to attack these problems either from a paralinguistic perspective or from a phonological perspective, which is not entirely suitable, not entirely adequate. The way that prosody works in the different domains is a little bit different, and I'll illustrate that for you. So the rest of the talk will be about pragmatic prosody. How does it actually work? How does prosody convey pragmatic functions? All right. Okay, why do we care? Information retrieval. If you can figure out from the prosody what the people in the dialogue are doing at a certain time, are they explaining something or arguing about something or deciding something, then for information retrieval purposes, you can discover not only the audio clip, the audio file, you can discover exactly where in the audio they're agreeing or complaining or getting excited about something. Speech recognition. So for language modeling, if you can kind of roughly predict which words are likely to come, right? A better language model gives better performance. And one way to do that, and this has been demonstrated by Toyama and others, is to use the prosody to sort of predict what's going on in terms of dialogue activities, and then use that to predict the words and improve the recognizer performance. The actual skills training, the actual science of human interaction. This is, I think, the topic of the keynote yesterday, right? So we who do speech have a window of insight into the details of human real-time interaction. Synthesis for and dialogue systems. So let me talk about dialogue systems. So what prosodic functions are useful for dialogue systems? So these are some of the roles of pragmatic prosody in human conversation for turn-taking, topic structuring, expressing stance. So in English, for example, we have specific prosodic constructions for holding the turn, for ending the turn, for giving off the turn, for back-channeling, for changing the turns using particles, for fillers, for emphatic pauses. So all of these things have specific prosodic constructions. They differ in different languages. Topic structuring, we have constructions for closing down a topic, for showing excitement, involvement, continuing a topic, for taking a topic in a new direction, for digressions, for priority topics. Oh my goodness, okay. And for stance, we have all sorts of constructions for things like expressing reluctance, enthusiasm, empathy bids, indifference, thoughtfulness, and contrast. So today, the dialogue systems that we build work because we train the users to avoid the prosody that conveys all of these functions. Because the systems we build can't recognize these functions, they don't need to recognize these functions, they're annoyed, as I say, they fail if the users try to use prosody in attempts to convey these functions. But as we move beyond simple question and answer and get the job done type dialogue systems to dialogue systems that can engage, entertain, motivate people, I think these aspects of prosody will become more important. All right, let me expand on how contrast is conveyed. So here we have two animals. I can describe them both using exactly the same words, but the one on the left, I would say, it looks like a zebra. It looks like a zebra. Okay. The blue line, of course, is the F0, is the pitch contour. The one on the right, well, it looks like a zebra, but it's not a copy. All right. So there's a difference in prosody. What is it exactly? The key seems to be a region of narrow pitch. Now, there's different ways to analyze this construction. The old guys had a little debate about how to exactly represent this, but what seems to be going on is a region of narrow pitch that's sort of bookended, that's set off, made salient by two bookends, which are pitch movements or occasionally creaky voice. The region of narrow pitch is most commonly low, as in the classic contradiction contour, but it actually can be high as long as it's there. Here's another example, okay?
The buses aren't the problem. They actually provide a solution.
Okay, so if you want to like convince people of something, this is a construction you really need to master. All right, and I'm putting this up. This is completely obvious. Everybody knows this, but people sometimes forget that prosody is not only suprasegmental, that's to say, not associated with the phonemes, but it's often supralexical. It spans multiple words, which is a challenge still today. Still a challenge for synthesis. So let me tell you how one of the state-of-the-art synthesizers handles this utterance.
The buses aren't the problem. They actually provide a solution.
Okay, not terrible, but not quite natural. A little bit robotic, I think, a little bit not quite human. Let me play it again, see how it sounds.
The buses aren't the problem. They actually provide a solution.
All right, not quite natural. Sounds robotic. You wouldn't be persuaded by a system that spoke to you in this way, I don't think. What's going on? This was trained by some people who thought that prosody is mostly segmental. It's phonological. You can describe prosody adequately by having the people who build your corpus read things that are in all capitals, and they'll do something that'll convey the meaning that you want. Well, it doesn't really work. It sounds quite different from what people really do. Here's the human reference.
The buses aren't the problem. They actually provide a solution.
Right, okay, so here we don't have that extreme bizarreness on the capitalized words. We have a nice narrow pitch region. Sounds good. So we've still got some challenges to go for synthesis, so the problem is not entirely solved. We have to remember that not all prosody is unit linked. Modeling those wider spanning aspects of prosody, I think, is not a solved problem yet. All right, good. Prosody is often a matter of degree. All right, so you are now all subjects to my experiment. I'm going to give you two stimuli. I would like you to listen and tell me which one, the first or the second, sounds more positive in tone.
Good job. Good job.
First was more positive. Second was more positive. Sounded the same. Okay, yeah. All right, the second one had more positive prosody, right? That construction I described earlier, there was more oomph into it. Let's make it harder. Now, that was at 20%. 0 is fully neutral, 100% is very strongly positive. Now I'm just gonna give you a 12% step. All right, again, first or second, which is more positive?
Good job. Good job.
First more positive, second more positive, sounded the same? Okay, it gets harder as these things get tighter together.
Good job.
Oops.
Good job.
Okay. Here's 8
Good
steps.
job. Good job. Good job. Good job. Good job. Good job. Good job.
Okay, if you do experiments where you have people compare pairwise things that are one step apart, you discover that across the entire range, they can make the discriminations. Not perfectly, but decently well. Which means that, of course, we have strong control, tight control of the nuances of what we're saying. In a word, prosodic meanings can often be gradient, not categorical. If this audience, I think you'll probably accept that. Other audiences, those are fighting words. The question then for synthesis and for recognition, how do we use that information? Even if we can model that successfully at the prosodic level, how do dialogue systems use that to make decisions? Those are open questions. All right, so let's go back to good morning. Good morning. If I say it that way, you're detecting, again, the pitch is the most salient. You're hearing 3 semitones, more or less, of drop. It's a sharp pitch down step. But this construction, like most of them, is not just about intonation. The first syllable needs to be flat and lengthened. Day O'Connell, who's measured this, has said it's about 200 milliseconds or more. Second one, also flat and lengthened. In addition, it has to be loud, relative to the speaker's normal speaking style. High in harmonicity, not low in the pitch range, preceded by silence. If there's a lead-in syllable, hello everyone, good morning. The lead-in syllable, everyone, also tends to be a little bit flat in pitch. The pre-downstep syllable tends to be articulated, good, can't be reduced. Post-downstep, it's flat, but less flat than the first one. It's a little bit longer, it's more harmonic. There's a lot of really detailed information that speakers have when they're producing this construction. So I'm sort of repeating myself here, but if you think about the old idea of an intonation contour, right, that's the tip of the iceberg. Prosody is about a lot more than just intonation. All right, so what does go into prosody? So the classical definition is that prosody is the musical aspects of speech, pitch, loudness, the timing properties. I think we can update that to say, and also the things that pattern with them. So the amount, the strength of the periodicity, for example, phonation type, creaky, breathy, falsetto, is it nasal or not? Reduction, enunciation, features of rate and timing, glottal pulse shape features, thousands and thousands of derived features. What windows do you compute these features of? How do you normalize? What do you do with outliers? So there's a lot of features. This open smile, I think in one iteration had thousands of features. And there's people in this room who are actually saying, well, prosody also correlates strongly with things like motion, with breathing and gesture. So there's a lot of things that we can include. So classically, of course, speech has been thought to be about the stuff that happens up here, but below the neck, as Professor Kaltenbacher suggested, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that we really haven't modeled. There may be features that are useful that we use unconsciously that are still not discovered. All right, so the state of the art, I think, is, on the one hand, these feature sets. So open smile is one, I have my own, and at some point you try to engineer them so that the features correspond exactly to what people perceive. And at some point you just give up and say, well, if it's useful and I can compute it, I'll throw it in. So you come up with these feature salad approaches. That's great. More recently, Feature-Parsimony is sort of the alternative. So the idea in this is you just compute features frame by frame by frame. By frame, you compute features in a robust, simple, uncontroversial way, and feed them into a model that's powerful enough to detect those temporal dependencies, the temporal structure. For example, a recurrent neural network. So the structure I'm showing here is one derived from a proposal by Sconce 2 years ago, where the information comes in the bottom. Every frame, you get the F0, the intensity, and a couple other things. The model takes those in, accumulates them, and this particular model is used for turn taking. Sconce showed that this model allows better than human prediction of turn end. So for dialogue systems, a human is speaking at some point, they may have a little pause. It's important to detect whether they're done or not. It's a classic problem. And with the recurrent neural network and just these 6 features, you can do better than any previous model, and you can do better than humans. What's actually happening inside that model? Probably it's computing things like pitch slope, pitch max, average, but we don't know. Presumably it's detecting those multi-stream configurations, but we don't know. Again, there's that challenge of sucking out the information. All right, so Oliver Niebuhr has this analogy. Every construction is like a coin. A coin has 2 sides. You've got the phonetic side, the form, and you've got the meaning or the function. You can't really study one side of the coin unless you know what's on the other side of the coin. That tends to be harder. For one construction, though, we do know a little bit about that, so I'll talk you through that and illustrate what's going on with a minor third construction. So this is used for things like good morning, or knock knock, or excuse me, or You don't even need words to make people stop doing things. If you're playing a game, somebody's sort of hesitating, you can say, go for it, and they'll start moving. I've heard out in the streets here, bitte, which seems to be almost the same pattern. My favorite example is peekaboo. So here's the cute baby picture. I don't know if you've done this at home, but in my family, when we get a new baby and the baby tends to be about 9 months old, you walk up to them and you say, peekaboo, right? That minor third, that down step. And they laugh. It's very rewarding. It's rewarding because this is, for most infants, the very first truly social interaction they have. The American Ministry of Health has guidelines for what children need to be able to do at different ages. And if your daughter, by the age of 9 months, is not responding in this way, you should take her in to be checked. It's a developmental diagnostic. But this is kind of amazing, right? So children are responding to prosody really early. At 9 months, they're not speaking. They may understand a few words, but it comes in very early. It's very basic, very fundamental, but not universal, of course. Okay, so what's the shared meaning of all these things? All these things we can do with this construction. It seems to be to cue some kind of socially required response within a tight time frame. So if I say, knock, knock, you've got to come back with who's there. It's got to be on a specific time frame. All right. So in general, prosodic constructions are not just things that we produce or hear. I think of them as joint patterns that can be used to coordinate action or generate rapport. When we do things together, whether it's dancing or engaging in this sort of dialogue routine, we tend to generate rapport. So let me give you the opportunity to grab your neighbor again, and those of you who are sitting apart from people, really grab your neighbor, go walk over to them and say, good morning, like that, and see how they respond. Did it work? Did you establish rapport? I'm hearing laughter. Did it even sound appropriate to do that? I'm guessing maybe not, right? And there's a lesson here, which is that prosody is really sensitive to all sorts of things. So if the person you're sitting next to you happens to be male, or they happen to be older, or wiser, or they happen to be, instead of 2 meters away, 6 meters away, all of those things affect the prosody of a simple greeting like good morning. The dynamics of the room, what's happened in the past. I think we have absolutely no clue how all these things work. I don't think it's a terribly difficult problem. I just think we haven't stepped up to it yet. So I think that's something we may look at in the near future. And we need that, right? For dialogue systems to show that sort of that common sense, context awareness that we really want to believe that they're human and intelligent and really trust them, we need this sort of control of the prosody. All right. More about the minor third construction. So I have a daughter, I have a 2-syllable daughter who I can call Susan, but I don't always do it the same way. If I want to tease her, I can throw in some pitch wiggles. I can call her Susan. If I want to warn her about something or let her know that she's approaching something that's dangerous or not quite right, it can be Susan, the final pitch upturn. If I shorten the second syllable, Susan, it's a reprimand. So what's going on here? I don't think we have an infinite profusion of constructions. I think we have one basic construction on which other constructions can be overlaid. In other words, prosodic forms can be superimposed, not just concatenated, right? So we're very familiar with concatenative models of phonemes or prosody or anything. We're good at that. Superimpositional models are a challenge, but very recently we were sort of figuring out how those should be built. Here's a model. Let me just explain it. So this is from Gerard Beatty. It shows at the top the F0 target. So the gray is the target. That's the observed F0. This is for a French sentence. And he explains this in terms of the superposition of, I think we have 6 layers here. The first one in orange is an overall description of the typical prosodic form of a French sentence. So the F0 starts kind of low, goes high, and drops off at the end. And then we have contributions for constructions for the topic, for the syntactic structure, for specific parts of speech. And all of these things are pulling the F0 up or down at each point in time. The observed prosody is the sum, the additive sum of all of those things. And when you add those all up, you get the blue line, which matches pretty good to the original gray line. Okay, so superpositional modeling can explain what you see. What's even more amazing is in this model, it was trained from data. So he had labeled data and the F0 and used various magical methods, which he'd be happy to tell you about, to discover automatically the patterns, the component patterns, those basic elements underlying the observed prosody. The concept of superpositional modeling has a long history, but only recently are we starting to figure out how to do that, and I think that'll be a big thing in the coming years. Okay, but at the same time, superposition does not explain everything. Alignment is quite an important and challenging issue. So if we think of prosody as sort of force fields that pull things in different directions, if I say, hello everyone, good morning, right? The prosody is aligning and operating on the words, but I can move things around a little bit. If I shift it a little bit to the left, I can produce, hello everyone, good morning. Same pattern, different alignment. All right, so prosody is semi-autonomous. Autonomous in the sense that you can choose a bunch of words that you want to say, and you can choose a tune or a prosodic construction, and you can choose an alignment, and everything else sort of works out. Sometimes. Unfortunately, it's only semi-autonomous. If I wanted to call the president of our association, he's only got one syllable, so I have to do something tricky. I could make it into John. That's legal. If I'm perhaps a little bit drunk and feeling familiar, I could call him Johnny. Okay. In general, different languages have different strategies for managing this alignment problem. Here we've seen segment split, epenthesis, where we actually add a brand new vowel in there. Sometimes truncation is used, compression, undershooting, realignment, lengthening. How this is actually done, nobody knows. How can we model it? Nobody knows. I don't think it's that hard. It shouldn't be impossible, but at the moment, this is still a challenge. Okay. So let me give you a further illustration to show how important and interesting this is. So here's that positive assessment construction, and here's another example. Okay. You'll hear the positive assessment, and he's doing something funny with his lexical choices.
It's really cool, like, coming up with, like, you know, a program and then, like, being able to see, like, that program on someone else's phone.
Okay, you're hearing it, right? The word like. What is it doing? It's not doing anything semantic. It's just providing a landing site for the realization of this prosody. So we need to think, I think, about prosodic lexical co-choice for generation synthesis. I think it's tractable. All right. Okay, final example, the late peak construction. So if you grab your neighbor, okay, don't do this, but if you were to grab your neighbor and squeeze them, they would probably produce a sound. You know, squeeze them tight around the chest, force out some air, force it through the vocal folds, they'll produce a sound. If you squeeze them harder, the sound will be louder and probably higher in pitch, right? As more air goes through the vocal folds, they tend to vibrate faster. You don't have to do this because any stressed syllable that you hear will almost certainly have an energy peak in the middle at the vowel aligned with a pitch peak. That's sort of the default. But there's also a pattern in which the pitch peak comes a little bit later. So the aligned peak would be something like the marmalade. And to do this, you can try tapping on something, the marmalade, right? People tend to align their gestures of all kinds. But I can also say the marmalade, where the pitch peak comes way after the intensity peak. It's actually way over, in this case, on the other syllable. All right, what does that feel like it means to you guys? One thing it often means is suggestions. In English, different languages have different patterns, of course, but in English it can mean invitations. It can be used for correcting misconceptions, asking questions, reminiscing, speculating, offering, expressing approval, mixed agreement, mixed feelings, seeking confirmation. So this is a problem we often see with prosody, right? So a single prosodic construction conveys a whole network of meanings. For practical purposes, this is quite a challenge, both for the scientific study and for applications. All right. Okay, we'll skip that. Perceptions of pitch are complicated. So if we sort of stylize the pitch, we can tell a simple story where we compute the location of the pitch peak and compare that to the location of the intensity peak. But in fact, that's not the way things work at all. Barnes has shown that if you change the shape of the pitch contour, the punch will occur not exactly at the peak, it'll occur a little bit later. For different shapes, it can occur earlier. Niebuhr has studied concave and convex uptowns. It's very seductive to draw the F0 and visually process it, but the visual processing of F0 makes you think about things like max and min and average and locations that really may not have perceptual significance. We're just beginning to understand these things. All right, so here's the final exercise. This is kind of subtle, but I'd like you guys to produce the utterance. Maybe we can talk more over coffee. First, with aligned peaks as a brush off. It's like, maybe we can talk more over coffee. Goodbye. And then as a sincere invitation. Maybe we can talk more over coffee. I'm doing it over the top. I'm doing it for every single stressed syllable. But grab your partner again, and say the sentence in both ways. See if you can hear the difference. Okay, how did it work? Did it go? Yeah, for some people maybe. For others, probably not at all. Not all languages do this for this kind of invitation, and individual variation is enormous. Even for native speakers of English, there's a substantial percentage of people who do not use this construction in this way. Other people do it, but they vary the details of how the alignment is managed. How is individual variation in prosody modeled? I think that's the new hot topic. There's a few papers and posters at this conference on that, but I think we still have a lot more to understand. All right, well, there's the summary slide. And finally, I don't think there's a lot of time to say everything I want to say, but you know, maybe we can talk more over coffee. And that's a sincere invitation to you all.
Okay, I think we have time to take maybe one question. Here in the middle, the microphone.
Thanks for your talk. I'm interested, like how well could we work today already on tasks that cover many, many cultures? Say I want to do something for dialogue processing for all countries in the world. How well could I be doing that right now, or what would be your suggestion on how to work on that?
For all languages and all cultures? I think that's...
Well, say 30 or 50 languages.
Well, I don't think we're anywhere close at the moment. Yeah. I mean, if you have enough data, you can solve specific problems, like paralinguistic problems. Some of those things are to the extent that prosody is controlled by visceral functions, those are somewhat universal. For other problems, if you have enough data, you can, of course, build a synthesizer or a recognizer for this or that. But in terms of building dialogue systems that effectively use prosody to communicate meaningfully across languages, that's going to take us some time still, I think.
Okay, we could take one more very, very short question, if there is one.
I hope this is short, but if I want to make my digital assistant more aware of prosody, I could do two approaches. I could say I'm going to use features that are aware of prosody, or I could use some sort of detector that recognizes some prosodic features. What approach do you think is a quicker or better approach in this problem space?
I think it depends on the problem. I'd be happy to talk to you later about that. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nigel, and from the Interspeech Organizing Committee, a really big thank you for a great survey talk. It was a great pleasure, and sort of this is a memory of your talk. Okay, thank you very much. Congratulations.